Me record. Cool. Hi, Tabish. So thank you for joining us today. Actually, I'll start with asking you why loops? Why did you decide to invest in loops? But in your case, it's actually even more interesting because you were one of our first users. So in your case, like, why did you decide to use loops, but then why did you decide to invest in loops? Is actually two questions that I'll ask you.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a great question. I think like one of the biggest things is loops. I feel like came along this idea of like data-driven analysis better than most other companies in this current, like it was kind of like the next generation of what data-driven analysis looks like. It's like insights delivered to you at your fingertips based on like what you've decided for like your company objectives and your business strategy and things along those lines. It's interesting because up until this point, everything you would get from data-driven analysis would actually be self-serving data. Like you'd go into Amplitude, you'd go into Mixpanel, you'd look at the user journeys you'd want to look at, you'd make hypotheses about like what the core actions are, and then you'd sort of like run correlation analysis or like whatever it might be to figure out like what your aha moment is or what specific features or journeys are driving your like business objectives or like your like North Star metrics. The really interesting thing about loops is that you've essentially outsourced an automated insights generation tool to this product that is now essentially conversing with you and having a conversation with you on what your core journey should be looking like. So the core thing that allows you to focus on as a product manager, which is really the value that you're bringing, is not going into Amplitude and figuring out what knobs and buttons and dials you should press, but figuring out what is the core business strategy and what is the core value, and then putting that into a system, and that system is spitting out insights at you. And it's telling you, it's like, hey, you've told us this is your business strategy, but it seems like these are the actions that are happening that are either correlating to that, or more interestingly enough, these are the actions that people are not doing that are also like a negative correlation based on like what you're looking for. And I think having the power of that like comprehensiveness, but also having the distillation of those insights at your fingertips is actually really valuable, especially for like a product manager who can get overwhelmed with like all the amount of data that you're getting, especially right now. Like everybody tracks everything. Like there's like so much information to the point that there's so much noise. And so there's a lot of analysis paralysis. And I think the value of loops is having that like consolidated view, but really distilling the core insights that you need to move the needle on your business. And I think that's what, for me personally, like what really excited me about like the product. And even when like we were using it, like as an example, like we nailed our activation metric like immediately, like within like a couple of weeks after me floundering around with like different like activation combinations, being like, I'm just throwing stuff at a wall right now.
Yeah, it's a great example. Eventually, Tabish, one of the things that we are looking at once we show insights is eventually getting, product teams and growth teams to run an experiment based on those insights. And I think my next question to you is, what is the kind of misconception from your, vast experience throughout the years? What is the misconception the product manager have around experimentation?
That's actually a really good one. I actually think, to be honest, like there's a variety of different misconceptions that I've seen like across my career. I think the biggest one though is that people sort of have a very narrow-minded view of what experimentation is, and they really only look at, oh, A/B test. And it's like there's so much more to like an experimentation, not even just like program, but also just like experimentation in general, outside of just like looking at an A/B test.
Yes.
I think even like broadly understanding like what are like the core problems you're trying to solve for, what are the metrics you need to be moving, what are the guardrail metrics that like you need to be like looking out for, how are you setting up your A/B test, who are you even focusing on for the A/B test, what specific part of the user journey does the A/B test need to run on. And most often what I've seen, especially having worked at like the first like product hire, growth hire at like 4 different places, everybody just, this is what it looks like. It's like, hey, I have 50% of users in control, I have 50% of users in split in like the test variant. Let's just put them through, and then a week later we'll just look at our metrics. And I was like, that's just not the right way to do it, because there's so much noise in that like analysis and the way that test is set up. Is that one, there's no cohesion around why you're running the test. It's like, well, let's just throw things at a wall and see what sticks. Two is, if you're not actually running the test at the point in time when you need to bifurcate the journey, you're actually adding more noise to the data, because now you're essentially, there's a lot more, what would you call it, like confounding variables into essentially like how you're running the test. Even when the test is done, a lot of teams are like, okay, control performed better than test, let's just keep it as it is and move on. And I think that's the missed value of experimentation so much, is like really the learnings that you're getting from that experiment. Even if you're like winning, or like the test is successful, or the test is failing, whatever it might be, the real value of experimentation is like the learnings that you're getting from it. And it's really interesting because by the time we got to, I think, like 3 or 4 months into Replit and the experimentation program, one of the things I was like, we're actually just looking at these numbers and we're just trying to make decisions. And then I told the team, I was like, we cannot conclude an experimentation without actually having interviewed or talked to users in both the control and the variant to deeply understand why the changes we made were actually impacting them in a way that was valuable or not valuable. And I think having that rigorous like analysis and like post-analysis like follow through of like, what was the result of this experimentation, how does this tie back to the broader business like objectives, why are we working on this, and then having that essentially like dictate the next wave of experimentation, I think really brings it full circle. So I think a good way to think about experimentation is it's not a linear journey. It's actually more like, pun unintended, it's more like a loop, right? It's like you start with like a hypothesis, you have like a core set of like business objectives that you want to tie it back to. You then think about like how you're gonna like plan and like measure. You then like run the test. And this is the part that people only think experimentation is. We run the test, and then once you run the test, you're thinking about like your analysis sequence, you're thinking about your post-analysis like action items that need to happen, and then you're sort of like figuring out like what are the next steps and the next hypotheses that we need to focus on. So I think that actually like that loop is actually like really important, and like going through that loop. And there are times like you may spend more time on one part of the loop or the other. And granted, like on the testing itself, you might be spending more time on how to set up the test and things like that. But if you're not looking at the full picture, you're really missing the value of what experimentation could look like, and you're just throwing A/B tests at a wall.
You know, Tabish, this is such a great example. What we've seen throughout, I think, the years is companies launching an experiment, and usually they get the results, either it's not sig or not, and then they just move on. But you're actually offering something beyond that, which is, I would say, quite unusual across some of the industries that we work with, which is actually combining qualitative kind of data with the quantitative, right? It's asking the folks in the treatment and the folks in the control around the reason, the why it actually like it underperforms or overperformed. And that's kind of like super interesting, because you're getting to a place where you know that the treatment may be kind of won by 20%, but you know why also, based on combining the qual and quant data, which is very interesting, very unusual across this many of the companies that we work with, in I think super valuable kind of tip to actually get the learnings that you need from your experimentation program. So that's really great example. Now, I think, Tabish, we talked a lot about bringing insights, running the experimentation, and so on. One of the things that we see at Loops is that basically product managers and data analysts kind of collaborate over the platform. I think this is kind of an interesting, I would say, relationship that we see across many product and growth teams. And the question for you is that, do you have any kind of tip for better alignment and collaboration between product managers and data analysts?
Yeah, so I actually think, I mean, to be honest, like one of the biggest issues that I've seen is that data analysts and product managers, they're really just fancy titles. So like, I think if you want to enable better alignment and collaboration, you actually need to forget about those titles entirely. And the reason I mention that is because I feel like when PMs get access to data analysts, they fall into this trap of asking them questions when really they're the ones who should be asking questions. And data analysts fall into this trap of just like providing answers when reality data answers should be like pushing the data. Like data analysts are the ones that are like really looking at the data with a critical eye and like asking questions of like, why is this happening? Like, why, like, does this make sense or does this not make sense? And the whole idea between the collaboration between the PMs and the data analysts is centered around that conversation. In a world where the PMs are asking like questions around like why we need to look for specific data points, as opposed to asking what does the data point say or show. And in a world where a data analyst is looking at the data with a critical eye and actively thinking about the questions that the PM has asked about, like why it's doing that, as opposed to just like taking a number, hey, retention is 10%, go do whatever you want with it. That's the place where where like better alignment collaboration happens, because of the fact that that actually inspires a lot more discussion. And I think a very core tactical thing that's actually needed for that is a really good, strong written culture, and a really good, strong written like brief or thesis into like why we're using the data we're using and how we're going to use that data. And granted, like I think like time is always like a scarce resource at like every startup, and most like teams like don't want to take the time to like either write it down or like spend time like thinking about it. And so they just like ask for a lot of data points to see if they can like scrounge together like a narrative or a story that like fits their like vision. And what I say to that is usually like you may be moving a little bit faster, potentially like a lot faster, but you're really just doing garbage in, garbage out process with your data. And that's actually extremely dangerous. And I feel like data is one of the few things that I'm always like, just take your time with it. Like everything else, if you want to ship, if you want to iterate, go fast, like break things, that's okay. With data, it's so hard because when you make like a wrong decision off of like messy or faulty data, it compounds over time and it just has disastrous effects on the business. And so I think in a world where PMs are asking the why behind why certain things are happening, and they're figuring out what are the right questions to be asking, and data analysts are actually digging deeper into why those things are actually doing the things that they're doing, and they're both having a shared knowledge of like the business objectives, the company goals, like what we're trying to focus on, it allows for this like shared vocabulary and a shared like goal of like trying to like solve the user problems together, as opposed to being like a service oriented model where PMs are like a client and data analysts are like the vendor, and PMs go to data analysts and are like, oh, like tell me what retention is today, and data analyst is like, oh, today it's 10%, and the PM's like, great, we hit our OKR, and it's done. And that's a very weird collaboration, because like really what you want to be happening is the PM asking like, well, I want to know like why users are doing this thing. And the data analyst is like, why do you want to know that? And the PM then explains, well, if we understand why users are doing this, then it actually helps us unlock this like core part of the user journey, which we think is delivering a lot of value. And then data analyst is like, okay, well, the data is showing this or XYZ, which is interesting because we've never seen that happen before. And I wonder why that is. And that inspires a conversation. And that conversation is so valuable to the business because essentially what it goes back down to is like learnings. Like to build a sustainable business, you're essentially building it on a bed of learnings. Like that's what builds a sustainable, repeatable business. And so I think that's what I would think about thinking through like how to better align and collaborate between like PMs and like data analysts, as opposed to like getting them like locked in their like titles of like PM runs the product, data analyst runs like data. I'm like, everybody runs the product. Everybody's responsible for knowing what's happening in the product and the data.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity, Tabish, to remind everyone that data analysts are not dashboard builders. That's not what they are here for. Yeah. They have perhaps Casey and I we were discussing that perhaps like sales folks, very similar to sales folks, they have a quota. They need to drive insights. They have a quota of insights that would move the business. That's what they should be focusing on, and less about another visualization kind of that product manager asked them to do so. So I think it's like the example that you gave is really powerful. And maybe the last question that I'll ask you, Tabish, is around, we always talk about insights eventually are mean to an end to drive impact on the organization, on the business result. And if you can kind of share with us a real case where you were able to rely on specific insights from your data to drive positive impact on your top line metrics.
Yeah, I mean, so this is actually a really interesting one. And I really like this example because I think and this is like the power of like rigorous data analysis, right? Like it really can power like your full business. So at Replit, when I joined the company, our retention was like pretty decent. Like it like flattened out over like long-term retention. I think it was probably across like maybe 18 to 24 weeks. And acquisition numbers were healthy. And then I think about like 2 or 3 months after I joined, I noticed that acquisition numbers were actually like spiking a little bit more than usual, but our retention was dropping. And initially, like my naive self was like, oh, like acquisition numbers are spiking. We're probably acquiring users that are probably not fit for the product. And so retention numbers are like dropping. Maybe I'll like look into it. And so when I looked into it, I was like, I couldn't figure out why retention numbers were dropping. And then I started like segmenting by different like countries and devices. And essentially what I noticed was we're now getting a huge influx of like signups from Asia and Indonesia. And a lot of those signups are coming from mobile. And now I'm trying to figure out, why are these people coming to Replit, which is a IDE on their phone? Why are these people trying to code on their phone? And then the more I dug into it, the more like now I'm emailing those users. Now I'm like talking, like I'm asking them, I was like, why are you going to Replit on your phone? Like, why are you trying to use this like on your device? And I'm getting TikToks back. Like I'm getting TikToks back of people sharing videos of themselves coding on their phone, posting it on social media and showing other people how they're learning how to code on their phone. And now I'm thinking, I'm like, oh my God, this is a movement. And now I'm looking up what are other places to code on your phone? Like where are other people learning how to code like on their mobile device? And there's no good alternatives. And immediately at that point, I'm thinking, I'm like, our mobile share versus desktop has increased like almost like 5 to 10x. Our retention has dropped. And so now I'm talking to like Amjad, our CEO, and the rest of like the broader like product and engineering team. And I'm telling them, I'm like, we need to build a mobile app, because right now people are going to the mobile website. They're still retaining their, albeit they're retaining like worse, but there are a core group of people who are still finding value on the mobile web experience. And talking to those users makes it seem like that it's an accessibility issue. They don't have access to fancy laptops or hardware or anything along those lines.
Yeah.
So we should double down on this like analysis and on this insight of like people like using us on their phones because they don't have access to a lot of these like devices, and because it's extremely easy to get started on Replit. Those are two core insights that were powering the business. And I was like, if we can build a mobile app that's extremely intuitive, that works on low latency networks, that allows people to immediately get started and learn how to code, this could be a huge gateway to a market that is essentially untapped for mobile development, especially like in Asia. And so that was the point in time where we were like, okay, there's a lot of like analysis done behind like focusing on which devices we need to be like thinking about, what countries are even activating on those devices, because at that point we were like, well, these users in Indonesia and India are already coming to us on their phone and they're looking for an app. These are countries that are predisposed to using apps. Whereas in the US, there's like a lot of like app fatigue right now,
Right.
and like people aren't downloading a lot of apps. And so we're like, well, when we build for a lot of these users, who are we really building for? Are we building for developers? Are we building for people who are learning how to code? And so that also spurred another set of questions that we were then thinking about. It's like, okay, when we build a mobile app experience, what does the first touch experience need to look like? And a lot of that, again, then went back to the drawing board of like, okay, like all these people that are coming and signing up, like, are they coming from schools? Are they like students? Are they like older? Are they developers? are they hackers? Like, what are they building? And then like looking at the mobile-based projects. And I think that specific like journey of like starting from like, why is our retention dropping, to building a full-fledged mobile app was extremely grounded in data. And it was a project that every step of the way we were like, who are these users? Where are they coming from? Why are they coming to us? What are they building? What do they like do with us after they leave? And that essentially allowed us to develop in such an iterative fashion on like, what are the core user journey that we need to be focused on mobile. And then we launched the mobile app, and the mobile app essentially reached up to like, I think number 3 or number 4 on developer tool ranking on the App Store. And it was one of those things that had such a positive impact on the business, because now we essentially cornered this part of the market where there's not a lot of good like developer tooling software for you to get started and like coding. And now we have like the Replit mobile app that's now being used by, I think it's probably over like 500,000 people already. And that was great. Like, I think like that was something that really powered our business, because we were like, well, our core business objective is really getting people to get started coding really easily. Right now you can do that, but the only way to do that is actually on a laptop. And as it stands, you're not always near a laptop, but you are near your phone 90% of the time. And so mobile just made so much natural sense, given like what our users were doing and given what the business cared about, to start focusing on. And I think that was something that just like the data completely powered that. Like that was an insight that was completely driven in data. Like it wasn't like a hypothesis that came out of the sidelines or from like Amjad or anyone else. It was like, this is a purely data-driven decision on like the business, and it has outsized impact on like getting people to like use and like retain on the platform.
It's such a great example, Tabish, because you actually show how you instill data-driven decision-making across the different steps of basically developing your product, which is an amazing example. And also you showed kind of like, I think, other 2 principles that you can think of, which is one, on the importance of segmentation and sub-segmenting, meaning you looked at the Indonesian or the Asian users inside mobile, which is definitely kind of like not trivial. Many of kind of like, I think, teams don't go that deep to understand the combination of things that actually provides you with a different kind of like behavior. And also the combination of quantitative data and the qualitative ones, where you identify the what, that they behave differently, and then got another kind of like why in the qualitative data, which is exactly, I think, the combination that you want to see when you make your product decision. So that's actually a very solid story that I think align really well with like Loop's value proposition around the importance of root cause analysis, automatic segmentations, and kind of like basically suggesting what would be the next step after you see that retention is going down. What are you going to do with that? So great example. Tabish, thank you for your time. It was great having you with us.
Tom, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.